You're listening to a Times Higher Education podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Campus podcast. I'm Eliza Compton, Deputy Editor of Campus, on solo hosting duties this week. Today's episode tackles the essential but elusive concept of belonging in higher education. It seems to be generally agreed that a sense of belonging is a core human need, and that in an education context, feeling valued, respected and part of a community are connected to academic achievement, student retention and well-being. Belonging, after all, sits in the centre of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's one rung above safety and a higher priority than esteem or self-actualisation. But when we dig a little deeper, belonging resists clear definition, both what it is and how it relates to other concepts such as inclusion and mattering. This is especially true in a post-pandemic world where online learning and the digital transition have blurred the boundaries of university life. To get a better idea of what belonging means and how educators can foster it on campus and online, I talked to Karen Gravett from the University of Surrey, who has researched students' experiences of belonging in the digital environment. The insights she shares come from asking students how they see belonging in their everyday lives. But as you'll hear, she also takes a theoretical approach, drawing on her previous work on students' transitions into higher education and student engagement. Her picture of belonging is both material and flickering, dynamic and very much connected to time and space, and our conversation gets into these aspects as well as practical advice for educators, institutions and students themselves on how to foster belonging and general well-being. Karen Gravett is an Associate Professor in Higher Education and Associate Head of Research in the Surrey Institute of Education at the University of Surrey. Her work looks at the ways that theoretically informed approaches can help us to understand education and society. For example, in the areas of belonging, which is our topic for today, digital education, student engagement, relational pedagogies and literacy practices. Her 2023 book, Relational Pedagogies, Connections and Mattering in Higher Education, explores the role of relationships, trust, authenticity and vulnerability in teaching and learning. And she is the principal investigator for the project Belonging to and Beyond the Digital University, working with Rola Ajawi of Deakin University and Sarah O'Shea from Charles Sturt University in Australia. The result of the work is a series of 11 downloadable illustrated cards with student quotes on belonging and evocative questions around themes such as curation, safety, contribution, non-belonging as an active choice, feeling part of something larger, excitement about learning, flexibility and connection to an academic discipline. All of this gives an idea of the breadth of what belonging entails and what we're here to talk about in this conversation. So Karen, welcome to the Campus podcast.
Thanks, Eliza. Really delighted to be here with you.
To start us off, belonging is a bit of a slippery concept. So from your perspective, what is belonging?
Yes, so that was something that we were interested in and that prompted the research that you described. And this idea, this notion of the slipperiness of belonging. And what we'd noticed was actually a really, really interesting trend, preoccupation across the sector in higher education with the concept of belonging that had really, really increased over the past decade. And we can see, it's not hard to see why educators are increasingly interested in notions of belonging. We know that our students are having a tough time. We're concerned about the well-being of our students. We're also concerned about issues of retention, engagement, completion. And also there's been lots and lots of shifts in the ways in which higher education happens, where it takes place, post-pandemic and so on. So educators are increasingly interested in belonging, but what we'd noticed also was a burgeoning of what you might describe as belonging practices which were happening all over institutions, but actually that we felt like the scholarship and the critical attention to what belonging means had not really kept pace with the work in this area. So what we wanted to do, specifically in the research project that you mentioned at the start of the conversation, is we really wanted to speak with students to understand a little bit more about how students themselves described and articulated what belonging meant to them in their everyday lives, enabling us then to go beyond what we felt that educators assumed belonging might be, including ourselves. And it was really, really fascinating in our research that our students told us they really told and also showed us, because we asked them to record video logs, vlogs, to depict their experiences of belonging and not just narrate. And they showed and told us that they experienced belonging in a multiplicity of ways. Belonging was something that was materially constituted, so created and also curated in time and different spaces. It was very much situated in specific moments and places and spaces. It was also an incredibly affective experience, so something emotional. It was, students told us it was dynamic, it was emergent and changed, shifted, it was flickering and in flux, and it was very temporal. So, this multiplicity of diverse conceptions of belonging that happened in different ways, different places, spaces, and times, was something that we then went on to encapsulate in the website that you mentioned. And I'd like to say that both of these research projects were funded. So the initial research with students was funded by the Society for Research in Higher Education, whereas the follow-up work was funded by an ESRC Impact Award grant. And that actually enabled us to create this website, which is called belongingtouniversity.co.uk. And what happened was we worked with a fantastic artist, Astrid Jekyll, who's based at Edinburgh in the UK, to visualize our data. And as you mentioned at the start, she was able to create these fantastic cards which offer 11 insights into the complexity and the multiplicity of belonging as articulated by students. So 11 different ways that we can understand both belonging but also non-belonging, and how it's happening for real students in our universities in these current times. And the cards are freely downloadable to anybody who wishes to use them with their colleagues or with their students to think and discuss about this issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned the artists because they really are beautiful. This project came out in the wake of COVID, and you mentioned many, many things that we're going to unpick, I hope, in the course of this conversation. But I wondered if you could talk a bit about how the pandemic has changed the way that you think about belonging.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for most of us, the pandemic was a really pivotal time in changing and challenging our thinking. For me personally, as a teacher, first of all, it really brought to life the diversity of students' experiences of education and the inequities. And the importance of materiality and of space and place. So, for the first time, we saw into our students' bedrooms, we saw the challenges in which our students, ourselves, and our colleagues were experiencing just trying to engage with education from their different environments and with their different personal issues. That led me to really, really be sort of hyper vigilant to a desire to understand and surface the complexity of belonging as a concept, and the diversity of students' experiences. And it also increased my interest in digital education and the ways in which connection is experienced differently in digital and hybrid spaces and places. And that was something that we explored in the research. And it was really, really interesting that actually the digital affected belonging in a number of different ways. So one of the things that was very important in our research was this notion of space. and students' ability to feel safe in a space, but also to be able to curate their own learning spaces. So, for some of our students, the ability to engage remotely and online was actually an incredible affordance to belonging connection. They spoke to us about how they were able to study in spaces that felt safe, that felt warm. They talked about the importance of objects and the material things, for example, feeling connected at their desk, being able to shut themselves in and have quiet, being surrounded by their books and their resources. At the same time, other students told us of the great feeling of disconnection at the loss of in-person connection and particular access to physical on-campus spaces. So again, it opened my eyes to the real need to avoid making any generalizations about how students study online and in person, but also to the increasing fluidity, the porous boundaries between the physical and the online. I think never before has it made less sense to talk about belonging to the university, because where the university is increasingly flickering and in flux. And I think that's a really, really interesting area for educators to explore.
Do you think that kind of flickeringness and the fragmentation, for example, you might feel part of the university, but within that you might feel part of a smaller group within the university. So that might be your discipline, it might be LGBTQ plus. How is a teacher to manage these sort of different levels of belonging? I don't know whether I phrased that question very well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you absolutely have. I do completely understand. And
thank you.
it's really important, I think, for educators to feel that they can sort of not be overwhelmed by the complexity and actually take the ideas forward to foster meaningful experiences, meaningful educational experiences for their students. And I would first start off by reassuring all teachers that they don't need to and they can't possibly take full responsibility for managing belonging for students, because while we have an active role to play, our students told us that belonging was created by a multiple breadth of different actors. That includes teachers, of course it does, and I'll talk in a minute about what teachers can do. But it also very much includes the role of peers, absolutely. That small groups, connections with peers, disciplinary communities came to the fore as being still really, really important in many students' a sense of identity and sense of belonging. Also, spaces, I've mentioned spaces and places and objects were very, very important, and access to usable technologies. So there are many different actors that contribute to a student's experience of higher education. Saying that of course does not mean that educators don't have a really valuable role to play. And I would suggest that our research tells us that educators can help students to feel senses of belonging in numerous ways. First of all, I think educators have a role to play to understand the complexity of belonging and to have conversations, if possible, to have dialogues with their students about this. So some of our students told us about how sometimes they felt a sense of needing to not belong to particular communities, which felt uninviting, unwelcoming, that felt exclusionary, or that they perhaps couldn't join for particular practical reasons. They felt sometimes an experience, a fear of missing out, FOMO, a pressure to engage in extracurricular activities and to sort of, participate in certain activities and feel this sense of belonging. So I think educators have a role to play to have conversations with their students, if they possibly can, about the complexity and the many different ways in which a student can experience belonging and foster a sense of belonging at university. That's really, really important, I think. I think educators can also work to think about different initiatives for belonging. So, one of the really interesting findings in our research was that for many students, belonging was created by them through this feeling of purposefulness. Students told us how they wanted to contribute and gain a feeling of being part of something larger at university. And this might be by contributing as a mentor to a mentoring scheme, contributing as a student partner to a staff student partnership activity, or some other way of volunteering or contributing their time in a meaningful way. So educators can look to create these kind of activities and opportunities for students and think about how these opportunities can be created in equitable ways. Universities are also doing some really fantastic work in creating different opportunities through extracurricular activities, events, welcome events, induction activities, and all of these are really, really valuable. I think it's just the key is to be mindful that there is no one size fits all, and actually to approach belonging with criticality and care and make students understand that it's absolutely okay to experience a sense of belonging in the way that works for you.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like through various parties and groups that this is a way of making the experience at university meaningful. And one of the words that came up when I was doing a bit of reading around belonging, and that is actually in the title of one of your books, is mattering. And I wondered if you could talk a bit about the difference between mattering, belonging, and inclusivity. These terms seem to be intertwined, but perhaps there are important distinctions between them.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. Thank you for asking that because I think that those three words are really valuable words for educators to reflect on and to sort of have in their tool bags to in their work with students. I absolutely agree that there are lots of interconnections and overlaps between the three different concepts, but perhaps some important differences. I think for me, the concept of mattering has become increasingly useful in my work because it's quite a mobile word that works on a number of different levels. So, firstly, for me, mattering works to signal this idea of mattering as in the sense of value and to prompt us as educators to ask the question, how can we make our students, particularly in our present times, with all the financial pressures and marketization of higher education, how can we do our best to make our students feel a sense of mattering, that they matter, that they are valued as part of their university experience? So mattering works in that understanding and interpretation of the term, but it also has a further meaning, which I find incredibly useful in the sense of drawing our attention to matter, as in the physical, the material definition of mattering, which prompts us then to look at the materiality of education. So thinking about mattering as in what do spaces do, what do technologies do, what do objects do, what do university campuses do, what do our classrooms do, what do all of these material forces, what role do they play in shaping students' experiences and actually contributing to senses of connection, belonging, and so forth. We've spoken about belonging and how we might understand that already. So I'll come to the last concept which you mentioned, which is inclusion. Inclusion is something that's really, really important in educators' work in contemporary higher education. And I think it's a very valuable term in encouraging us to think about equitable practices, including students and colleagues, and how we can work to create inclusive practices. Inclusion also suggests a particular group, a particular place or environment or community. And there are, as we saw in our research, there are times when students and academics or teachers may need, for valuable reasons, to exclude themselves from particular communities, practices, or environments. So I think that while inclusion is still a really, really helpful term, belonging and mattering adds another layer of richness to our thinking about this important area of education.
And also, we're talking about students, which are obviously less and less a homogenous group. So it makes sense then that belonging and these different ideas would have different levels in order to connect with, or institutions need different levels in order to connect with students and feel that they are valued, that they matter, and that they do belong. Belonging has quite high stakes as well, I believe. It's highly connected to academic retention and success and a feeling of well-being. What kind of skills do students need, or even staff for that matter, to support their own sense of well-being?
Yeah, I think for students, what students need to support their well-being and to have a meaningful experience at university is perhaps the knowledge of the support networks that are available to them. So universities, have fantastic support networks that are available, whether that's through disciplinary lecturers, personal tutors, but also the fabulous professional services teams, wellbeing centres, academic skills and development units. There is a lot of support out there, but it can be really overwhelming as a student to understand how universities work and who can help them. And actually, one of the really interesting findings from our research was that the importance of micro moments, small moments of connection in a student's experience, where just one person or just one experience or one practice was a really meaningful instance in a student's experience of learning, and actually really enabled them to feel a sense of connection. So I think students need to have access to knowing, to the knowledge, to know who to contact. And also, this is something that's really important throughout their whole experience. So we do a lot of work on transition in the beginning and the outset of a student's journey, but actually students need to know about who can support them throughout their whole journey into and through higher education. They also need to have access to the knowledge to know that, learning is challenging, and there will be times of challenge and times of difficulty, and that's absolutely okay, and that's absolutely an important part of learning, but also to recognize the difference from when they really are in need and they really do need to turn to a different source of support.
In what sense are these sorts of skills life skills? I'm thinking of the confidence that it takes to see yourself as part of your profession, for example, on graduation.
Yeah, I think they are life skills, and I think they're also very political, and belonging is something that's political. So I mean, some really interesting work by Thomas, and Thomas has written about how belonging can be understood as a practice and a product of the relations of power embedded in the field of higher education, often constructed around the privileged identities of the typical authentic student, young, full-time, and residential. And we know that for some students, perhaps those typical students that Thomas describes, access to confidence, to capital, to knowledge about how universities work and how disciplines work, and to professions is something that's available to some students and not others. So I think as educators, we need to be on alert to the political dimensions of belonging and ensure that as many and as diverse students as possible can access the knowledge that they need to succeed, the support that they need to succeed, and can gain confidence throughout their studies.
Mm. Belonging is quite a difficult thing to quantify. What does successful belonging look like?
Yes, it is a very difficult thing to quantify. there is work that tries to quantify it, but for me, a more meaningful approach is actually to look at belonging in all its richness, in all its fluidity, and all its multiplicity of meanings, as just as the students told us in our study. So following that, then, I think a really, really wonderful way of understanding what successful belonging would look like in a particular institution or discipline or cohort would be the provision of opportunities, spaces, places and resources to enable a diversity of belongings to occur, and for those students, for our students to really understand and be able to belong in different ways, in different places and times, and to belong in the ways in which felt comfortable and meaningful for them. So I think for me, successful belonging involves enabling a diversity of ways to belong.
Just as a final question, Karen, what got you interested in belonging in the first place?
I think I've always been interested in the diversity of students' experiences of education. I have been doing research into students' experience of transition, of student engagement. And I think, as we were saying earlier, Eliza, it was really perhaps around the time of the pandemic that it was so visible to me, the importance of the materiality of education, the importance of space, of place, of technologies, and actually how these were shaping feelings of connection and belonging, that I really wanted to understand more. And I was also really fascinated about the changing boundaries of the university and how we were engaging in our university places and spaces in some really, really different ways. And so I wanted to understand the impact of this in order to contribute to my own sense of purpose in supporting and fostering students' engagement in higher education.
Has it changed your practice?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. I use the findings from the resources on the website regularly. I've been privileged to have brilliant conversations with other educators across the world about issues to do with belonging and engagement and relational pedagogies. And I'm always learning about the diverse things that are happening and the brilliant things that are happening in universities to support students. So yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Karen. It's been great.
Pleasure. Thanks so much, Eliza.
I loved that conversation. And I hope listeners will take away useful advice, as well as perhaps a touch of relief that educators are not totally responsible for their students' sense of belonging. Peers, disciplinary groups, access to technology, students' own sense of purpose, and the spaces in which they undertake their studies all have an influence. And it's okay not to want to belong and to resist FOMO and the pressure to participate in any aspect of university life where you don't feel comfortable. As Karen says, there's no one size fits all. I'd like to thank Karen Gravett from the University of Surrey again for her participation in the podcast and sharing her insights. To learn more about the Belonging to and Beyond the Digital University project and access the cards that Karen described, go to belongingtouniversity.co.uk. Campus has also just published a collection of articles offering practical advice, case studies and institutional level frameworks for fostering belonging from contributors around the world. You'll find that, as well as more articles, videos, podcasts and webinars at timeshighereducation.com/campus. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please follow, like or subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
You're listening to a Times Higher Education podcast.